I've been a forest ranger for as long as I can remember. Every day I wake up to the fresh scent of pine, the sound of birds singing, and the sight of towering trees stretching as far as the eye can see. It's a job that I love, one that keeps me close to nature. My name is Benny, and this is a story about one of the strangest days I've ever had in the forest. It all started on a crisp autumn morning. The leaves had just begun to turn shades of red, orange, and yellow, painting the forest with vibrant colors. My partner, Ranger Austin, and I were making our usual rounds. We checked the trails, made sure the signs were clear, and looked out for any animals that might need help. It was a routine day, or so we thought. As we walked along the trail, the forest was alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and chirping birds. The air was cool, and a gentle breeze blew through the trees. Austin and I were chatting about the upcoming weekend when something strange caught my eye. "Hey, Austin," I said, stopping in my tracks. "Did you see that?" Austin turned to look where I was pointing. "See what?" "Over there," I said, squinting into the distance. "By the big oak tree." Austin followed my gaze, and for a moment we both stood still, staring into the forest. At first, I thought it might be a deer or a bear, but this was different. The figure was tall, and it was covered in dark fur, and it moved quickly, almost too fast to follow. "Did you see that?" I asked again, my heart starting to race. Austin nodded slowly. "I saw something, but I don't know what it was." We both stood there, frozen, watching as the figure disappeared into the trees. It moved so fast that it was hard to tell what it was, but one thing was clear. It wasn't anything we'd ever seen before. "What do you think it was?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Austin shook his head. "I don't know, Benny. It was too far away to tell, but whatever it was big." We stood there for a few more minutes, hoping to catch another glimpse of the creature, but the forest was still. The only sounds were the wind in the trees and the distant call of a bird. "Should we check it out?" I asked, feeling a mix of curiosity and fear. Austin hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, let's go. But we need to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with." We started walking towards the spot where we'd seen the figure, our footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. As we got closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a chill run down my spine. When we reached the big oak tree, we looked around carefully. There were no signs of the creature, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing. It was as if whatever we'd seen had vanished into thin air. "This is strange," Austin said, frowning. "There should be some kind of sign that it was here." I nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's like it just disappeared." We stood there for a while, searching the area, but there was nothing to find. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet, and it made me uneasy. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light," I said, trying to convince myself that there was a simple explanation. Austin didn't look convinced. "Maybe, but I've never seen anything like that before." We decided to head back to the ranger station. As we walked, I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it an animal we didn't know about? Or could it be something else, something that people have only talked about in stories? Back at the station, Austin and I sat down to talk about what happened. We went over every detail, trying to make sense of it. "Do you think it could have been a Sasquatch?" I asked, half joking. Austin looked at me with a serious expression. "I don't know, Benny. People have been talking about sightings of Sasquatch for years, but there's never been any real proof. But what we saw today, it was something. We both knew that whatever it wasn't normal. But without any evidence, there wasn't much we could do. We decided to keep it to ourselves for now. After all, who would believe us?" Over the next few days, I couldn't get the sighting out of my mind. I found myself looking over my shoulder whenever I was in the forest, half expecting to see the creature again. But there was nothing. The forest was as peaceful as ever. One evening, as I was sitting by the campfire, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. My heart skipped a beat, and I grabbed my flashlight, shining it towards the sound. But when I looked, there was nothing there, just the wind blowing through the trees. I sighed and sat back down, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. Maybe Austin was right. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Or maybe we really did see something that day, something that we weren't meant to see. I ran away from home that night, tired of the constant fighting between my parents. They never seemed to notice me anymore, caught up in their own problems. So, I packed a small backpack with some food, water, and my flashlight, then left the house without looking back. It was late, and the woods behind our neighborhood felt darker than usual. I had no plan, just a need to escape, to find some place where I could be alone. The deeper I went, the more the trees closed in around me, their branches reaching out like hands trying to pull me back. But I kept going, my feet crunching on the dry leaves and twigs underfoot. After walking for what felt like hours, I came across something strange. An old rusted fence, half covered in vines. Beyond it, I could see the outline of a large, crumbling building. It looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. The windows were shattered, and the walls were covered in graffiti. Curious, and a little desperate for shelter, I decided to check it out. I squeezed through a gap in the fence and made my way to the building. As I got closer, I realized it was an old prison, or at least it looked like one. The tall, looming structure was intimidating, and a shiver ran down my spine. But the night was cold, and I needed a place to rest. I convinced myself that it was just an empty building, nothing to be afraid of. The front door was hanging off its hinges, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and musty, filled with the smell of mold and decay. My flashlight cast long shadows on the walls, making the place feel even creepier. But I pressed on, stepping cautiously over broken glass and debris as I explored the abandoned prison. The cells were empty, their iron bars rusted and bent. I imagined the people who had been locked up here, their lives wasting away in this cold, dark place. It gave me the chills, but I tried not to think about it too much. All I needed was a quiet corner to rest until morning. I found a small room at the end of a hallway, away from the main cell block. It had a single window that was mostly intact, letting in a sliver of moonlight. I laid out my jacket on the floor and sat down, leaning against the wall. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional drip of water somewhere in the distance. As I sat there, trying to calm my nerves, I heard something. It was faint at first, a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. My heart started to race as I listened, straining to figure out where it was coming from. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be right outside the room. I held my breath, afraid to move. The scraping stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent again. But then, I saw it. A shadow passed by the doorway, moving slowly, almost lazily. I could barely make out its shape, but it was tall, thin, and hunched over, with long, spindly limbs that didn't look quite human. My blood turned to ice as I realized what I was seeing. It was a creature, unlike anything I had ever imagined. It moved with an eerie, unnatural grace, its limbs bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. It looked like something straight out of a nightmare. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen with fear. The creature paused in the doorway, and I could feel its gaze on me, though I couldn't see its eyes. I knew I had to do something, but I was trapped, with nowhere to go. Then, As suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and continued down the hallway, its long fingers scraping against the walls as it moved. I waited, my heart pounding, until the sound of its footsteps faded into the distance. When I finally felt brave enough to move, I grabbed my backpack and crept out of the room. I had to get out of there, to escape before the creature came back. But the hallways seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. I couldn't find the way I had come in, and panic started to set in. Every creak, every distant noise made me jump, my mind imagining the creature lurking around every corner. I stumbled through the darkness, my flashlight flickering as its batteries began to die. Just when I thought I was completely lost, I spotted a faint light ahead. I hurried toward it, hoping it was the way out. The light led me to another door, this one leading outside. I shoved it open and stumbled out into the night, gasping for breath. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't care. I was out, free from that horrible place. I didn't stop running until I was far away from the prison, the old fence and the woods disappearing behind me. Only when I was certain the creature wasn't following did I finally slow down, my legs aching and my lungs burning. I found a spot near a small stream and collapsed there, too exhausted to go any further. The adrenaline still pulsed through my veins, and every rustle of the leaves made me jump, but at least I was out of that prison. I didn't know what that creature was, and I didn't want to know. All I cared about was that I had escaped. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I knew I couldn't stay in the woods. I had to go back home, no matter how bad things were there. Nothing could be worse than what I had just faced. I made my way back, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened. Would anyone believe me if I told them? Probably not. But it didn't matter. I knew what I had seen, and I would never forget it. That creature, that thing, was real, and it was still out there, lurking in the shadows of that abandoned prison. My name is Jason, and I live in a small town called Pittsville. My life is pretty normal, and I don't get into much adventure. But one day, something happened that I will never forget. I was driving back home after visiting my brother in a nearby town. It was a trip I had made many times before, so nothing seemed unusual at first. The road was quiet, and I was lost in my thoughts, enjoying the ride. But as I got close to a place called Kaiser's Ridge, I noticed something strange. Several cars were pulled over on the side of the road. Curious, I slowed down and stopped my car too. People were getting out of their cars and pointing towards the trees. They seemed excited and a little scared. I looked where they were pointing, and that's when I saw it. There, standing near a tree, was a creature like nothing I had ever seen before. It was tall, with green, scaly skin like a lizard, and it seemed to be looking around nervously. People started taking pictures and videos with their phones, but no one dared to get too close. A few brave souls tried to walk towards the creature, but they quickly turned back and ran to their cars when they got too close. It was as if they knew they shouldn't go near it. I was fascinated and couldn't take my eyes off the creature. I grabbed my camera and started recording. The creature just stood there, looking around, while more and more cars stopped to see what was happening. At one point, a car stopped right in the middle of the road, blocking both lanes of traffic. People started honking their horns, but the driver didn't move. He was too busy watching the creature. After what felt like forever, the creature turned and walked back into the woods. It disappeared into the trees, and just like that, it was gone. Everyone got back into their cars and started driving away, but I stayed for a moment longer, still trying to process what I had seen. My hands were shaking as I put my camera down and started driving home. When I got home, I called my brother and told him everything. He didn't believe me at first, but when I told him about the video, he realized I was serious. We talked about what the creature could be. Maybe it was a lizard man, or maybe it was something from another world. I spent the next few days looking at the video over and over again, trying to figure out what I had seen. I even posted it online, hoping someone could help me understand. But all I got were wild guesses and a few people saying it was a fake. In the end, I never found out what the creature was. Life went back to normal, but I couldn't forget about that day. The video is still on my computer, and sometimes the most ordinary day can turn into something extraordinary.
The forest was always our special place. Mom and I would come here often, just the two of us, to escape the noise of the world. The trees stood tall like friendly giants, their leaves whispering secrets to anyone who would listen. I loved the sound of the crunching leaves under our feet, the smell of the pine, and the way the sunlight filtered through the branches, painting the ground with patches of gold. "Isn't it beautiful, Ashley?" Mom asked as she walked beside me, her hand warm and comforting in mine. Her smile was gentle, just like the breeze that played with her hair. "Yes, Mom. It's perfect," I replied, squeezing her hand. Every time we were here, I felt safe, like nothing could ever go wrong. We continued our walk, following a path we knew by heart. Birds sang above us, their cheerful songs filling the air. Squirrels darted up trees, their bushy tails flicking as they disappeared into the canopy. Everything was alive and peaceful. After a while, we reached our favorite spot where the sun shone brightest. There was a big rock in the middle, smooth and flat, perfect for sitting. We always took a break there, and today was no different. I climbed onto the rock and stretched out, feeling the warmth seep into my skin. Mom sat beside me, pulling a book from her bag. "How about I read to you for a bit?" she suggested. I nodded eagerly. Mom had the best voice for reading. It was soft and calming, like a lullaby. She opened the book and started reading a story about brave knights and magical creatures. As she read, I closed my eyes and let her voice carry me away to a world of adventure. "Mom, do you hear that?" I whispered. Mom stopped reading and looked around. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. "I don't hear anything, Ashley," she said softly. But that was the problem. There was nothing to hear. "Maybe we should go back now," I suggested, hoping Mom would agree. She nodded, closing the book and putting it away. "Let's head back, sweetie." We got up and started walking back the way we came. The path that had felt so welcoming before now seemed dark and unfamiliar. I held on to Mom's hand tighter, my heart beating faster with each step. As we walked, I began to notice something strange. The trees around us seemed to be closing in, their branches reaching out like twisted fingers. The air grew colder, and a faint smell of something rotten filled my nose. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a mix of a wild animal and something much worse. And I looked up at Mom, her face pale with fear. "Ashley, stay close to me," she whispered, her voice shaking. We quickened our pace, but the growling grew louder, closer. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a sense of dread that made my legs weak. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Suddenly, a shadow moved between the trees. It was tall, much taller than any person, with long, thin limbs and eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. The creature stepped into view, and I gasped in horror. It was a Wendigo. The Wendigo let out a blood-curdling scream, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of sharp, jagged teeth. My body froze with fear, and I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. "Run, Ashley," Mom shouted, pulling me along as she turned and sprinted down the path. We ran as fast as we could, the Wendigo's footsteps pounding behind us. I could hear its breath, hot and heavy, as it chased us through the forest. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. We veered off the path, crashing through the underbrush, hoping to lose the creature in the thick forest. Branches scratched at my arms and face, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting away. "Mom, I'm scared," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "I know, sweetie. Just keep running." Mom's voice was strained, but she kept pushing forward, never letting go of my hand. The forest seemed to twist and turn, the trees becoming more tangled and dense. But no matter how far we ran, the Wendigo was always right behind us, its growls growing louder, more vicious. Then, up ahead, I saw something that gave me hope. A small cave hidden among the rocks. "Mom, the cave!" I shouted, pointing. Without hesitation, we dashed toward it, squeezing through the narrow opening just as the Wendigo lunged at us. We tumbled inside, landing on the cold, hard ground. The Wendigo roared in frustration, its long claws scraping against the rocks as it tried to reach us. But the cave was too small for the creature to enter. It paced outside, snarling and snapping its jaws, but it couldn't get to us. We huddled together at the back of the cave, holding each other tightly. My heart was still racing, but the immediate danger had passed. We were safe, at least for now. "We're okay, Ashley," Mom whispered, brushing the hair from my face. "We're going to be okay." I nodded, though my body was still trembling. The Wendigo continued to claw at the entrance, but it couldn't get through. Slowly, its growls grew quieter, and eventually, the creature gave up. I could hear its heavy footsteps fading into the distance as it walked away. We stayed in the cave for a long time, too scared to move. The forest outside was quiet again, but it no longer felt peaceful. The shadows seemed darker, the trees more menacing. Finally, when we were sure the Wendigo was gone, we cautiously made our way back to the entrance. It looked almost normal again, as if nothing had happened. I woke up early one morning, the sun barely peeking through the curtains of my room. I had always been a curious girl, drawn to the strange and mysterious. That day, I decided to take a different path on my walk through the woods near my house. I loved the woods. They were quiet and comforting like an old friend. As I walked, I noticed someone ahead of me. It was a girl around my age, with dark hair and a calm smile. I had never seen her before, but she seemed friendly, so I walked over to say hello. As we walked together, she talked about many things. She told me about a group of people she had met. They were special, she said, and they had a way of seeing the world that made everything make sense. They were like a family, and they were always there for each other. She spoke in a soft, soothing voice, and I found myself listening closely. The more she talked, the more I felt like something was wrong. The words she used were simple, but there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy. They were too dark, too deep, like they were hiding something. I felt a chill, but I couldn't pull myself away. She told me they were looking for new people to join them. They needed someone like me, someone who was open to new ideas. She said I should meet them, see what they were like. It sounded innocent enough, but there was a feeling inside me that kept growing, telling me to be careful. As we walked, the woods around us seemed to change. The trees looked taller, the shadows longer, and the light dimmer. The path we were on didn't look familiar anymore. It was like the woods were closing in around us, guiding us somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to go. Finally, the girl turned to me with a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said this was the place where they would meet. I looked around, and the clearing felt wrong, like the air was thicker and the ground colder. The sky above was dark, even though it was still early in the day. I knew then that this wasn't right. The girl in front of me wasn't what she seemed. There was something off about her, something not human. I could feel the presence of something else, something darker behind her smile. The chill inside me grew, and I knew I had to leave. Without a word, I turned and walked away. I didn't run, but I moved quickly, not looking back. The woods felt heavy around me, but I kept going. I didn't stop until I was out of the woods, back in the light and safety of my home. I never saw that girl again, but the memory of her stayed with me. I knew she wasn't just a girl, and the place she had tried to take me wasn't safe. I had come close to something dark, something dangerous, but I had listened to the warning inside me. The woods were still my friend, but I was more careful now. I knew there were things out there that could look like people but were not. I knew to trust my instincts, and I never took that path again.